these days people don't like being sold to.
Big goals.
Where does money go to make more money?
Most startups fail.
So these New Zealand companies were sort of brainwashed.
They're just raising money to continue on that burn.
It's learning, right? It's all learning.
Yeah.
Your view of perfect and your customer's view of perfect, you're going to have to accept right from day one is going to be poles apart.
I've actually never heard anyone talk about that.
I don't come from the place that people think you should come from to be where I am now.
I'm Shona Grundy, founder and host of These Three Things, a podcast aimed at building a thriving and more inclusive startup ecosystem through sharing real lessons from people doing the hard work. We focus on the three strategically critical aspects of the startup journey: raising capital, finding product market fit, and expanding offshore. If you find this useful, please subscribe and recommend the podcast to at least 3 other people. We appreciate you lending us your ears and joining us for this episode. Today's guest is Lisa Miles-Heal, or known as LMH. Lisa is a seasoned leader in the world of business and technology, with a remarkable journey from her role as COO at Black Bay in Christchurch to becoming the CEO of the cutting-edge accounting SaaS company Silverfin. Lisa's career is a testament to her exceptional leadership and expertise. Her impressive resume also includes a pivotal stint as the VP of Product at Fiserv and a successful tenure as CTO at inventory management software Unleashed. Today, she spearheads Silverfin as their CEO, driving innovation and excellence in the world of accounting technology. Lisa, welcome to These Three Things.
Thanks very much. That's interesting when you hear other people talk about you, kind of, oh, really? Is that what I've done? It's nice to be here.
It was a fabulous introduction. You're based up in London this morning, our evening, aren't you? Oh, no, sorry, Bristol.
Yeah, I'm at the home office in Bristol, but I split my time these days between the London office and our HQ over in Belgium. So I kind of do 4 to 5 days a fortnight in Ghent, and then I do 3 to 4 days in London and Shoreditch, and then a couple of days in Bristol.
So you're fully based up there full time now. That's where you live. That's where you're running your business.
Yeah, that's where I'm doing everything. I've obviously got strong ties back down into New Zealand still, and funny at the moment, both our children are down in the Southern Hemisphere. So our son is just finishing up secondary school. He's been at boarding school and heads off hopefully to Canterbury University next year. And our daughter is doing a 3rd year work placement of her degree up here in the UK, and she's down in Melbourne. So I've got 3 trips planned into New Zealand, Australia in the next 4 months, which is interesting story there. You might have heard about recent changes here at Silverfin, and I got on a call with my new boss this week. And aside from talking about lots of really important transitional things, I said, look, I just need to talk to you about some leave I need to take. I've got some travel coming up. I don't want you to think that I go to New Zealand every month from the UK, but over the next 3 or 4 months leading into Christmas, I've got a trip November, I've got a trip December, I've got a trip January. So I'm still coming to the region quite a bit and stay quite connected. And I think you may know this, but I advise a couple of businesses still in the New Zealand, Australia market, kind of help them with some of their thoughts and ideas about scaling globally, and I stay quite connected to NZTE as well. So whenever I'm in town, I always offer if I can come and help any businesses that are looking, particularly with sort of UK and Europe expansion, kind of what can I do to help while I'm in town, kind of thing.
Your career is actually really interesting. So we haven't brought you on today as a founder and CEO. Part of the show is actually to go, who are these successful founders and CEOs working with in order to grow and scale their company? And, looking at your career, COO, Chief Operating Officer, Chief Technical Officer, VP of Product, and now the CEO, you've gone right across the gambit of a technology company. So I'm super interested in all the different variations of skills, because I could imagine that you have a clear top-down viewpoint of a lot of companies. How did you can you give us just a bit of background as to how you started your career, and how did you get into this? Because, not many women are at the top of the game in New Zealand technology either at the moment. Well, I mean, they are, but,
Yeah, well, they might
be
be recognised for being top of their game. So it's a really interesting story, I think. I mean, it's one I've told in the past. In summary, I don't come from the place that people think you should come from to be where I am now. If you speak to people, I grew up in Wainuamata in Wellington. I came from a very, very working class background, very young parents. My mother was 16 when she had me. My mother's mother was 16 when she had her. I breathed a sigh of relief when I turned 17. Let's just put it that way. And I was reasonably smart when I was younger, but I didn't come from a position where that smartness could be leveraged very well. Quite young, though, I kind of realized that if I did well in the working world, I could do it on my own terms. And perhaps because I came from an environment where my mother and father said, anything's possible, Lisa, because you kind of start with nothing. So you make your own way in the world, which was fantastic advice to get as a young woman. I've grown up with a great deal of sort of tenacity and resilience. And, we could spend a whole other podcast talking about what it's like being a female CTO in, years gone by and the only woman in the room. And I'd go to events with my husband and everybody would assume I was his plus one and all kinds of things. And, so there's a real journey there about sort of being in those non-traditional roles all the way through pretty much. How did I get into technology? I started in, you can check LinkedIn and see where I started, but there was a pivotal turning point in about 1997. That feels, but I was in my late 20s. I was really young. I was asked to work on a GIS project, which technology-wise we all go, what? It's like, is that like working on video recorders or something? But it was, at the time, it was the breaking edge technology to move property and information data for the local councils into digital format. And because I was working in a role at Auckland City Council, I was asked to go over onto that project. And that was probably where it started, where I started thinking, this combination of I'm a little bit bossy, very well organized, I can empower people and I can sort of organize people towards a common goal. It doesn't really matter what the goal was. But then suddenly this thing called technology change came in the mix. Was like, well, I'm not a technologist. I can't write code. But gosh, this is quite interesting. It's a change management dynamic. It's thinking about things in a different way, like really re-engineering the way you look at processes in business. And I'd always been into business and blah, blah, blah. So anyhow, it kind of transpired that I did that. That was into technology. And then I think the other thing worth calling out is that I'm a Peace Software alumni. We're kind of all over the place. There's a bunch of folk in New Zealand who in the sort of kind of at the turn of the, sort of like 2019, around that time, Peace Software was really cracking on. And it was one of the first businesses in New Zealand, I think, software businesses that was, and there were a couple more, I get there were some others, but there was one of the pioneers of really taking something out of New Zealand and dropping it into an international market. And in our case, it was the US and Canada, because the US was deregulating its utility sector state by state by state. It didn't have this construct of CIS software. I mean, it's really old tech. I mean, we're talking 4GL kind of stuff, like long, way before what we're using now. But it was pioneering in that sense that New Zealand then got to sort of put its software on the global stage. And a whole bunch of New Zealanders who'd been doing good work suddenly realized that the good work they were doing actually was really comparable to, the IBMs and the HP. It was like, oh, we weren't so shabby after all. So it was that real kind of experience of going, there's some stuff going on down in New Zealand that's really good. And if it could just get noticed a bit more overseas, it could be successful. And so for me, I spent some great time at Peace in Canada, in various parts of the US. And that's kind of where it all started. And then probably about 15 years ago, I moved over into SaaS. And I've never really looked back from sort of and I'd say B2B SaaS as well. And that's kind of what I've been doing since then. And I often joke with people that I've been a CTO, but I've never written a line of code in my life. But for some reason, highly clever, expert technical people seem to not mind being led by me, maybe because, they know they're better than me and I know they're better than me, so that's fine. But right from an early age, I think I decided I was going to be a specialist generalist. So I'm not a person that sort of came through my career saying, I'm one of these things. I definitely came through saying, I want to be good at a broad range of things, and I want to know how these things all fit together. And then I always said I'd never want to be a CEO though. So I had a bit of a chip on my shoulder that CEOs were a certain type of person and a certain sort of way of being that didn't fit very well with my kind of personal kind of values. And mainly because I used to say, I'm not really that interested in managing up and out. I'm much more interested in managing in and down within the organization. So I kind of decided that I was going to be what I call a career number 2, which meant if you were a CEO or a founder or both, and you wanted somebody who had a broad understanding of business and also didn't care very much for wanting your job, so left the whole ego factor alone, then you wanted someone like me, because I could come in and I could very quickly get a sense of what the business needed to be doing. And because I'm quite people-centric as well and a little bit crazy, then that meant that the founder/CEO could focus on all of that up and out stuff, and I could sort of get to work inside the business. And that's kind of the journey in a nutshell, if that was much of a nutshell.
Yeah, no, that's actually a really great explanation of, you always hear that term, you're not supposed to be working in the business, you're supposed to be working on the business. And often founder CEOs, they have no choice, right? That they're doing everything. But there has to come a point when you're bringing in the senior leadership and to release you to go up and out, and then bringing in this leadership to go, I'm actually now in charge of your process and your teams and your people to do the best that they can be. I'd read some things about, just little things about what you've achieved, taking a company from 1 million to 20 million ARR. I know that only this week you've actually been part of an acquisition of Silverfin, so congratulations on that. So I can imagine, I'd like to move on to that kind of the capital raising part of our show, because that's where a lot of our listeners are interested in. They're trying to understand what is capital raising, how do I do capital raising? So can you tell us a little bit of your experience in helping these companies either raise capital at different levels or even the exit? That's a really interesting story.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think, I suppose I operate in that space where companies have already broken through their kind of startup phase and they're in that scale up phase. And to some degree, I'm also in that phase where people are saying it might have been growth, no matter what. And now we've got to start thinking about sustainable growth. And along with that, often, if you're looking at capital raise in that phase of your journey, you're looking at a different kind of investor as well. So the investors that, in the angel stage and the seed and the early, and, I've invested in a few businesses myself. So, I know that that's a really important part of the process. But when you get to that point where you're looking for investors that are going to take you through those next milestones, they're looking for different things. So getting to sustainable growth is then more important than, sort of hockey stick growth at all costs kind of thing. Making sure you've got a good team on board that can actually represent the business, and almost to a certain degree, that's where founders need to start thinking about their kind of exit plan or their succession plan, because investors at that phase are sort of not, they're still buying the vision and the passion of the founder. But they really want to see that founder's gone through that process of going, okay, I realize I can't do it all myself, because they don't want to invest in a business that's going to that next phase where they know they need an executive team that's going to be held back by a founder that says, well, I'm not going to give anything up to anybody else. It's all about me. It's all about me. They still want founders in the business, but they want that founder to have realized that what they're really good at might be a particular piece of the kind of operation of the business, but they need to get great people around them. And that's quite a switch in founders' minds. And I think investors are looking for that maturity. They're looking for that kind of, okay, I know what I'm good at and I know what I'm going to get other people around me to do. The other thing they're looking for in that phase is they're looking for the ability for the business to keep growing, but profitability is also got, we talk, I'm really big on constructs like the rule of 40 and things like that. The rule of 40, I think, is a super sort of metric for people to keep. It's not everything, but it's a really important metric, because
what is the rule of 40?
So the rule of 40 is about balancing your level of growth and your level of profitability. So it's a kind of a construct that says the two together have to add up to 40 in order for your business to be in good shape. So if you've got 100% year-on-year growth, well, then the maximum that you can be spending is a kind of a minus 60 in terms of your EBITDA. And the idea is that you balance those things out. So I've worked in businesses, and that's fine. I've been in those businesses as part of that growth journey. You're nowhere near the rule of 40. You're just growing, and spending. And of course, your investors, that's why they're giving you their money. That's what they want you to do. They don't want you to be going, whoa, it's all about profitability next week. Now, there comes an inflection point, though, where there's only so much growth that you can keep going on before you actually have to start showing that growth is going to give return. Because then if you can show both in parallel, and you can say, I'm still growing at 35, 40, 50%. Again, it depends on your ARR number. Because when I'm talking about, if we take Silverfin, for example, and again, I've got to turn this into New Zealand dollars. So if we're thinking that we're operating at about 50 million ARR, roughly speaking, more than that probably, then when you're at 50 million ARR, then your level of growth, if you can still achieve 35% year-on-year growth, then you're doing pretty well. But on the flip side, you should be also introducing some profitability into that mix, so that you're creating some profitability that effectively is funding your investment. So it's not that you're at a point where you're constantly relying on investor funds to be, funding your growth. You've actually created momentum in the business whereby you can start making decisions about where you choose to grow, where you choose to invest, because you're filling the pot, so to speak, with some revenue and some profitability that's coming in that you've created. So you're kind of like almost removing your dependency on investment funds to fund your growth. Now that's that sort of middle phase. That's that scaling up phase. And I think the rule of 40 is a really good way of you keeping your eye on the ball. And some really big companies operating in New Zealand and globally, still are not really at the rule of 40. And there's some really good ones who are like at the rule of 60 and things like that. And I definitely would encourage people to keep an eye on that metric once you move out of startup phase and into scale up phase. That's a really important thing. It's also a very simple metric, so that if you can start engaging everybody in your business on understanding that metric and that goal and that target, it makes, I call it's increasing the financial literacy across the business, which I would say is a really important piece of once you move from startup phase and into scale up. It's making sure everybody in the business understands what is it that's really important to us, and what should we all be sort of putting our noses in the same direction towards. When I first started at Silverfin, people didn't really understand what rule of 40 was. Some people did, people in finance did, but not the rest of the business. And so I think it's a kind of a really important thing that you can walk out onto the engineering floor and ask your engineering group a couple of key questions about the metrics of the business, and they know the answer. So they know where we are in rule of 40. They know where we are on customer NPS. They know where we are on what's our current ARR, what is the run rate at the moment. If you can achieve that level of awareness across the team that these are the things that are important for us at this phase of our journey, then a bit like, and it's a bad example, but when you decide you're going to get pregnant, suddenly you start noticing all the other pregnant people on the street. Doesn't mean there's more pregnant people all of a sudden. It just means that your consciousness about that is suddenly opened up. So I've moved on a little bit from, the kind of fundraising piece, but I suppose what I'm trying to say is in that mid phase, if fundraising is really important, you've got to recognize what are your investors looking for in that mid phase, and what they're looking for is different from what they were looking for at the start. And you've got to make sure that you understand those metrics, and that not just you, but the rest of your team is also aligned and what I call literate in those metrics. Because otherwise, when you go to a fundraising meeting, or when somebody's doing due diligence on you, and I could spend another hour talking about due diligence process, don't worry about that. But there won't be congruence. There won't be congruence between what you're saying as a founder and what the people around you are saying as the people who effectively run the business. And that's something that investors would be just hot on straight away. They'd be going, hey, no, this is like we're being sold a story from the person up front, but that's not actually what the rest of the business thinks, nor is working to. So getting that alignment as early as you can about some really simple constructs, I think is really powerful.
If we consider that most startups fail, like I think it's a rate of 80%. I don't know if that's really true, but everyone talks about 80% of companies fail. So most of our experience, especially in New Zealand, when we talk about the tech space and where we're at, very few make it into that, scale up, large international offshore business, right? So most of our knowledge is right down there in that we know what a seed round is, so let's talk about what these different phases are. But I found it really interesting that you were saying it's not about every raise, it's about enabling you to burn cash flow. You need to have a plan at a certain stage of your business to say, this next raise, because you hear about the different raises, this next raise is not because I'm in the red, it's for another part. So if we think about the seed, right? This is how, and then I'd like you to pick up where you were coming into with these other rounds. But I know that like a pre-seed is often used for, I've got this idea, here it is on paper, and an angel might give you some money to say, go away and see if you can build a prototype. So you take that into, and then you go, I've got this little scrappy prototype. I'm now in seed. Yes, it works. And I think it's relevant to the problem. And so then some angels, maybe some VCs will give you a seed round, right? And then from that seed round, your next metrics are, will people buy it? Have I got a problem? And the way that they're asking you to prove that is like, get your ARR up. But there's all these other metrics that you were just talking about that should be right on, right? So I would say then they're raising an A round and they've proven I've got at least $1 million ARR. That's kind of what everyone's asking for. So ARR, just so everyone's listening, is your annualized recurring revenue. So that's how much that I'm going to get every year, and I'm very certain, and it's very predictable. I would say in New Zealand, people they're getting very savvy on that pre-seed, seed, and A. But where you operate is much more in that scale up, and we hear terms like B and C and D and these massive numbers that people raise. But I'm kind of going to assume that most people just go, they're just raising money to continue on that burn. Can you explain what you believe a company should be aiming for in those B, C, and D rounds, in terms of what they're supposed to be, sort of like big goals?
Yeah, big goals. I mean, I think it's about, like I said earlier, sustainable growth. Sustainable growth is what investors are looking for in those later rounds. When you move out of VCs, and it's a funny one because I'm not even sure there's a huge market for this in New Zealand, but when you're attracting private equity, so when you've got PE money coming in, it's a very different ballgame because PE funds are effectively investment funds for Joe average person who's got a retirement fund. It could be the government's retirement fund even. And they've got to find places to invest their money. They don't just put it all in the bank when you pay it in, your super fund. They've got to find investment vehicles. And PE funds are great places because they're a sort of a balanced amount of some risk, but also some good returns. So it's a really complicated world of, where does money go to make more money effectively? And PE funds are these great sort of places where investment managers, so fund managers, take the money of you and me and my mum and dad and invest it to try and get returns for things like super funds and things like that are going to make sure that we can, for example, enjoy a retirement later on. So there's a really big burden of responsibility that says, well, it can't be like a VC crowd can invest in things that are quite high risk with quite good returns if that risk realizes, but also some fail because they're taking investors' money. So they're taking not mum and pup investors, super funds. They're taking money from maybe some people like me who've earned some money and have got some money and think, well, I'm not going to earn money. I'm going to give it to you, VC, your fund, and you're going to go after some of these lucrative, high risk things, fully knowing that we could lose the whole lot if it didn't pan out. But that's not what PE money's about. So I think the first thing to think about what the investors are looking for is to actually have a little bit of an understanding about where do they come from, like whose money are they actually using to invest with is very different from the money that's being used in VC and clearly the money that angel investors and others are using, right? So once you understand that, there's got to be a different risk profile that goes with that. Therefore, what they're looking for is a different kind of business. They will generally not invest in unprofitable businesses or businesses that don't have a clear line of sight of when they're going to get to break even and when they're going to stay there. Now, they're okay if businesses are reinvesting from profitability into growth, but they don't want to see businesses that are dependent on ongoing injections of funds from investors to be able to be successful, because that's also another big thing is when you get into those later rounds, is that people don't like being minority investors. So down in the earlier rounds, you'll get VC funds and you'll get, angels and high net wealth individuals who are happy to invest, knowing that they're one of like 30 other folk who are all kind of in it together. In fact, there's a little bit of safety in that. It's kind of like, well, my investment size is littler. I don't have all my eggs in this basket. If it doesn't go well, it doesn't go well. When you get to the sort of the C and the D rounds, often the investors are saying we need a majority stake at a minimum, and sometimes they want quite large stakes because, again, it's the risk profile. They will sit on your boards and they will advise you as a founder CEO, and they will be making sure that you don't make decisions that put that investment at risk. Now, it's not the case down in VC land, because in VC land, sometimes you'll get people who come on your board because they're the ones who are representing the VC money, and some of them actually have never run a business before. They've been a great corporate banker, or they've come out of finance, and they're the ones who are there to kind of protect the money that's coming into your business, but they're not really operators. Up in sort of PE land, the big PE firms that are investing these large sums of money, they only put people on the boards who've got a very clear sense of operationally how is this business going, because again, they're managing that risk and they're managing their investment to make sure it's aligned. Now, don't get me wrong, they let you run the business, but I would also say, and this could be a New Zealand versus international thing, something I've noticed, is that the quality of board members and directorship, and therefore, dare I say it, the quality of investor money that comes in when you're in those later rounds. We talk about you can take any money or you can take good money, right? And good money doesn't just come with a check. Good money comes with expertise, connections, experience that you as a CEO and a founder can draw on, because it's not like you're in a situation where your board is going against you or playing bad cop or whatever. It's actually your board is working with you and saying, how can we help you to grow more, to become more profitable, to be more successful? And that's a really big shift that you see in those later rounds because of the type of investor you're working with and what their motivators are, the experience that they bring to the table and what their goals and objectives are. And so therefore, as a business, you've got to be making sure that you are ready for that type of approach and that you're not still out there, taking higher risk, being less structured about the things that you do, being less accountable, dare I say it, and transparent, because again, it kind of ties in with this founder transition thing is founders can't be good at everything. And I've never been a founder, so I have a great deal of respect for founders, and I've worked with many of them, as you mentioned earlier. I've often actually a bit of a habit of working with co-founders, so that when there's two founders, because they've seen a complementary skill set, they get the business to a certain point. And then what that two-founder group has to do is really quickly realize, okay, what is it that we need skills-wise in our business if we're going to be thinking about a Series C and a Series D, if we're going to be thinking about taking our product global and out of New Zealand, if we're going to be thinking about what does it look like in 5 years' time, what is that target we're going for? Invariably, you're not going to have the skills to take the business there. So getting those people on board and around you that complement you and take you in that direction is super crucial. It's an emotional muscle that you've got to kind of kick in, and hopefully you've got some people around you who know that is not actually taking anything away from you. It's great, like if I own 100% of a business, it's only going to get to 5 million ARR versus I might own 50% of a business that gets to 50 million ARR. Now, I'm not that great at maths, but I know that the second outcome is better, right? So if you're going to do that, and if you're going to grow, you have to accept that you need the funding to do so. And you have to accept then that funding is going to come with some expert advice. Then what you want is people around you that can counter that, that expert advice coming in from your investors and be pragmatic about it and make sure that you've got a balanced view. It's really important that you think about those things because they are coming around the corner if you're going to be successful. So assume you're going to be successful. Don't assume that you're going to stay where you are in this kind of 5 to 10 million ARR range. And I know getting to 1 million was hard enough, but there's lots of material out on the internet and stuff that talks about, and there's this phrase, the things that got you to 1 million ARR, the skills, the experience, the people that got you to 1 million ARR are not going to be the same people that get you from 10 to 50 million ARR. I've never seen that in my experience. Never, never, never. I've seen founders that stay in businesses and they take roles on and they stick around all the rest of it. But I've in my experience, never seen a business that can make that transition and grow and go global with the same set of skills that the founder brought to the table. That is an exceptionally rare thing. So get thinking about that. And because, again, just like the pregnant analogy, if you're thinking about that as a longer term outcome, then you're going to be exposed and you're going to notice things and you're going to grow your awareness around things that are going to be useful for you in the future. And that's not a bad thing. That, be thinking about the next phase is what I'd say.
I just want to pause here for a minute to tell you about our sponsor, Callaghan Innovation, Aotearoa New Zealand's innovation agency. This agency empowers innovators, helping you transform your world-bettering ideas into commercially successful ventures. What you may or may not know is that Callaghan have a fantastic suite of products called Upskill. These products will help you identify the innovation, R&D and commercialization skills you need to amplify and elevate your ideas, and then train you to put them into practice. So go check it out by heading over to their website, callahaninnovation.govt.nz/upskill. When we were talking about raising capital, you talked about some really important metrics that I wholeheartedly agree with you. I'm one of those people that are just like, let your staff know your burn rate. Let them know how much this business costs every day. Let them understand how much every customer costs us and how much we make from it. Like I'm just such a data person. So when I heard you start bringing up some, I think that's a really great thing to go back to. And I think that's more about achieving product market fit, right? It's like, how do we know there's more than just a lever of revenue to be experimenting and testing, and does this product fit in the market that we're going to? But from your experience, because you've done a lot of companies that have started off smaller and you've taken them internationally, what is the importance of product market fit? How do you assess it in a company, and what sort of data are you looking for to gauge your understanding of where your company's at?
I mean, sure, I think it's super important. I think, and I've learned, and I've changed some of my views on this over the years because, A, the market changes, but B, you also become a bit wiser, I suppose. I think NPS is a crucial thing. And it's a bit jargony word, Net Promoter Score. First of all, I'd say use a tool. There's plenty of tools out there. Some of them are getting a bit expensive now, but find one that's fit for purpose. You don't need the, the Rolls Royce of NPS to start off with, but get into NPS as quick as you can, because it's hard. It's really hard. And, I've been in companies that have had a 0 NPS for a number of years, and the goal was to get it into the positives. Now, and those companies were successful because, customers, including early customers, can be really critical. They can be really, really critical because they have high expectations, and you're bringing a product to market, and is it going to meet their there's almost like a honeymoon period. It's like, well, yeah, this is great. And then there's like reality sets in. It's like, well, it's great, but it doesn't do that, but it doesn't do that, but it doesn't. So don't be discouraged by, scores, but really get that feedback in from, I would be getting NPS in as quickly as possible, because it's a really good indicator of how likely, and it's a cliche, but how likely will those early customers recommend your product to others? Something I've learned about certain markets that are different from New Zealand is that there are some markets that are hugely what I call referent markets, meaning some markets, some segments for some products. And I'd say B2B is a bit more like this than B2C, because B2C with your products, you can get out there. There's lots and lots of marketing channels and ways that you can grow awareness, and, with free trials or freemiums, and I'm talking in the software sort of space. So apologies for those people who aren't pure play software folk, but I am. So, there's lots of stuff in B2C, and it's a mass market kind of thing. But in B2B, there's this really big construct, I think, that people have to love your product and tell other people that they love your product. And you can't underestimate the value of that. Like, these days, people don't like being sold to. These days, people want to do their own research. They want to feel that they're in control of the process. And except for some Americans, which sounds a bit biased, but I still do think selling is quite a sport, a two-way sport in America. And if you don't sell to people, they kind of think that you might not be very good. But in other markets I operate in, particularly in Europe and the UK, people don't like being sold to anymore. And there's lots of data out there that says that's the way it is. People are doing their own journey of self-discovery, and they pull themselves in the funnel, on their own. So I think it's really important that you understand how do customers perceive you? How are they talking about you? How do they describe the value of the problem you solve? And so there's a lot of talk about product market fit, right? And I'm an ex-product person, and I always talk about you've got to be product-centered. You can't be a sales-led organization if you don't have a great product. So be product-centered and be customer-centered as early as you possibly can be, because those things I think are going to be more enduring than saying we're a marketing-led organization or a sales-led organization or whatever, or even saying we're a rule of 40 business. Too early. Don't do that really early. And how do you know if you're product and customer-led? Well, you've got to put something in the hands of customers as quickly as you can. We could spend a whole other podcast talking about, product and engineering and development practices, because I've spent a lot of time in that. But the rule of thumb for me was probably 2 rules of thumb. One is, and if you haven't read, Lean Startup, go read it, because it's almost like the Bible. Then I'd also say another Bible is what I'd call the sales acceleration formula, which is another Bible of, when you've got something to sell, how can you be really, sure that you're selling it in the right way? But before that, 2 things. Build what you can sell and sell what you can build. You really need to understand that. If you don't stick a price on things or even ask people hypothetically what they'd pay for it, and get your product people into thinking about that all the time. Product people can build anyone can build great stuff, but will people pay money for it? So sell what you can build and build what you can sell is super, super important. And then the other principle I'd say is super important is get working software into the hands of users as quickly as possible. Working software, not perfect software, working software. Because your view of perfect and your customer's view of perfect, you're going to have to accept right from day one is going to be poles apart. No matter how well you think you understand your customer, no matter how well you understand the problem, you will be amazed and how big a gap there is between what they want or what they think they want and what you think they want. So get some working software into their hands and iterate on it with them together as quickly as you possibly can. So those are really 2 principles. And then the other thing I'd say is, as quickly as you possibly can, using a mind that understands these things, start focusing on your value proposition as quickly as you can. Product market fit's all about, does the thing do something on the tin? There's lots of people who talk about, and Gary Turner's actually got some great blog posts out at the moment. Gary Turner's the ex-MD of Xero in the UK. And he was one of the founding Xero folk, but he's a Scottish guy up here. And he's not with Xero at the moment, but he does some great material on his observations of growing a great business like Xero. And he's got this great whole sort of little snippet on, does it do what it says on the tin? And I really still believe that's a really good construct as well, is don't make out that it does something else that it doesn't. It's got to do what it says on the tin. So get that software in the hands, but then layer this value prop stuff on as quickly as possible. Value prop in its really simplistic terms for me, because there's lots of new models around value prop, but for me it's 3 things. 1, what is the problem that you solve for a discrete set of customers, users, customers? Not the problem we solve for this enormous plethora. There's one segment of customers that we solve this problem for them, this really big problem, this painful problem. 2nd, how do you do it in such a way that gives them a bunch of other benefits that they might not have realized they were going to get? But because of the way that you do it, you give them some fabulous benefits. And thirdly, how do you do those 2 things better than your competitors, including the ominous competitor of doing nothing, i.e. continuing to not use our software and doing it either, in our case, often Excel or, just not doing it at all. And if those 3 things, I call them the kind of the tripod of value proposition, is you need to get onto that as quickly as possible, because what that forces you to do is start explaining your value to the market, to your investors, to your staff, to everybody in a construct that's not just about, we've got the best product in the world. So once you've got on from product market fit, move as quickly as you can to value proposition focus, because people are going to stop you in the street and want to ask, and you're going to have that. You can call it an elevator pitch if you like, but you're going to have to be able to explain very quickly to them what it is that your, solution, software, product does, and why is it so much better than everybody else, and what kind of value does it deliver to them. And there's so much more focus on value these days than anything. I mean, I know it's well known. Don't talk about features, talk about benefits, blah, blah, but I actually think it's talking about value creation. How does what you offer create value for the people you're trying to sell it to? Now, the third thing I'd say is once you've got on from that, get really quickly into what I call the ARE metrics, which is acquisition metrics, retention metrics, and expansion metrics. And we used this a lot at Unleashed when I was there. It's like we had a whole management reporting pack, our monthly KPI pack, ARE, and we had some key metrics, and it was all about acquisition, it was all about retention, all about expansion. In retention, you're looking at your churn, you're looking at how do you monetize things, you're looking at you're looking at NPS. In expansion, you're looking at how do we upsell folk, how do we make sure that we've got engagement around new things that we're bringing out, how many referent customers do we have, because that's going to be a really important aspect to expansion. How long have customers stayed with us? What is it that customers are really saying about why they want to give us more share of wallets and things like that? What are the things they're looking for to expand? We call about adjacent technologies. You could go out and ask the market, but you should be asking your early customers. What is it that if we did a little bit more of this, you'd be prepared to give us some more share of wallet to bring it into our solution? And then your acquisition metrics are all the kind of standard stuff, and your CAC and how much does it cost to acquire them, and get your funnel right and understand the difference between an MQL and an SQL and an SQO, and get that right, because if you don't get those basics right, you're kind of not working on strong data. But yeah, that's probably the 3 phases I do. Your product focus with your market fit, then move into your value proposition, and then start assessing everything via ARE.
And this is what I love about what you're saying here. It's really strongly data-driven. And I kind of found that when I've worked in some other technology companies, when you're trying to get the strategy or an alignment, what are we doing? What are we trying to achieve? You'd have leaders come to a table and they'd be using words, right? They'd just be going, oh, things are good, or that's a little challenging. And I think everybody would leave the room going, I'm not really sure what that team over there is doing, but okay. And when I've worked with teams that started to move into what I hear you talking about, we're going to bring data to the table, and we're all going to look at the same data, and we're all going to have the same meaning. So when someone says, that's good, you can kind of go, well, that's an 8, not like, well, is your good a 7 and mine's a 3 because I'm so optimistic? It's like, no, it's a 7, and I have found that when, as early as you can, if you're bringing in that data framework, even if you don't have all the data or fully understand the data, at least you're having the same conversations. So powerful, aren't they? Yeah,
I agree. Having the same language in the business about the things that are important is super powerful, super, super, super powerful. I think I can remember one year at Unleashed when a particular target, which was to grow our ARPA, right? So first of all, you have to make sure everybody knows what ARPA means, which is your average revenue per account. Sometimes it's called ARPU because it's the average revenue per user, but in B2B software, it's generally ARPA, right? But to have everyone in the business know that we were aiming for an ARPA of X meant that everybody knew what that was. And so when product folk were talking with sales folk or when blah, blah, I'd walk past conversations and you'd hear developers or technical leads saying to product folk, well, how's that going to drive ARPA up? And as a leader in a business, that stuff's just gold, because you can't be in every single meeting saying, okay, that's a great product idea, but is that going to be, to my earlier point, is that going to be building something we can sell? You can't be in every meeting, right? So if everybody on the floor understands that that's a driver and something that they should be asking the question of their product colleagues, then how much more powerful is that?
I heard you talking about being up in Europe and how different Europe was to the USA, which is a really great segue into going offshore, right? So we're in this tiny little lifeboat at the end of the earth. We've got 5 million people. I mean, the reality is, if you want to be if you want to be a successful company that isn't just on a rat wheel trying to get ahead of your paycheck, we have to go offshore. So I can tell you've got a lot of experience in that. Can you tell me from your perspective how important it is for New Zealand companies, and what's the process for going offshore?
Okay, well, first of all, I think it's a mindset. It's got to be something that you think about right from day one, because if you don't, again, same analogy, if you're not thinking our aspiration is that we will be a global business, then you'll make decisions along the way that are sometimes a little bit hard to unpick if you've just said, well, we're going to be the best business in New Zealand. And it's funny because I'm dealing with some businesses at the moment, one who shall remain nameless, but it might come out, you might guess who it is. And they've basically said, We have no aspirations of taking our software outside Australia and New Zealand, none at all. And they're in the financial and accounting space, so you can probably figure out how it is. And I say to them, why is that? If you think, and they say, no, that's, we started that way. That's the way we're going to be. And I go, oh no, come on, you've tried a couple of times to go offshore. I know, no, they say, no, this is all we want to focus on. And so you can see how even with an exceptionally successful business, if that gets ingrained quite early on, it's a very difficult thing to unpick, because that's how the market then perceives you. That's how your people, and you're going to hire people who are going to have expertise in how to be really, really good at the things that you say you're going after. If you right from the start say that you want to be a global player, and it doesn't mean the whole world, you can even say, we just want to be able to be leading in 3 other markets outside of New Zealand, or you don't need to be so bold that you sound unrealistic. But having that global mindset is super crucial, and therefore having and hiring people that have got aspirations to do that. Because again, in that phase I talked to you about, when you've got to start bringing leaders in, there are some leaders for whom, and this is an important, I think we did it Unleashed when we were sort of at this part of our journey, is we actively asked people when we were hiring them if they were available to travel and work overseas and be overseas. So not necessarily move and live overseas, but could they travel? Now, I'm probably going to set, some things back here a million years and with what I'm about to say next. But in terms of people's ability to manage their work life and their family life, everybody's got a choice to make. We're all parents. I've been a working mother for goodness knows how many years. But I had to consciously make a choice that said, if I want to be global and if I want to work global, I need to know that my family and the structures I've got in my family as a working mum and my kids and my whatever are going to be okay with the fact that I'm going to have to travel and work overseas. Now, I'm not saying I lived out of a suitcase for 50 weeks of the year or anything like that, but I needed to be okay to travel. Now, when we started hiring people in this phase of Unleashed, where we knew that global expansion was imminent, we actually actively asked them that question, because there were some great people who answered that question and said, no, I can't travel. And we said, fantastic. We don't want you to be in a position where you come into this business and we think you're amazing. And then we say, look, we'd really like you to go up and do this thing up in Canada, or do this thing in the States, or do this thing in the UK. And you say, there's no way I can, because only one of two things can happen. You're either going to leave us and we've invested in all that, or you're going to be desperately unhappy because you're going to do it. And then your work-life balance, the home office manager is going to put their foot down pretty quickly, and you're not going to be in a happy place. So I think being really open with yourself, your business, your shareholders, that you do want to be global, is quite important to do that early on, because you're going to attract people for whom that's a really real possibility for them. I would recommend you take a two-step approach. It's something LMH is a bit known for, and it's called the on-market approach and then the in-market approach. Now, about 10 years ago, I think there was a lot of enthusiasm for, especially coming out of VC investor community, which was, if you, for example, are going to be successful in New Zealand, you have to go to the US. And if you're not successful in the US, you're never going to make it global. And that was the thing. And I'm taking some of you back here and some of your listeners are probably not old enough to even realize this, but there was kind of this thing. If you didn't have a presence in California, San Fran, Silicon Valley, somewhere, if you didn't have a presence somewhere in, California or the US, and if you couldn't do California, maybe you could do Atlanta. A lot of companies were going to Atlanta. Some were heading up into Portland and Oregon and places like that. But if you basically didn't have a beachhead, New York was too far away and too expensive, so that was okay. You weren't expected to go there. Then you basically weren't going to make it as a New Zealand software company. And in order to do that, the other thing that a lot of people were saying is, and you need to hire some really big guns locally. And I do have some phrases that I use sometimes that are probably not politically correct enough to use in this podcast, but there was this habit of hiring people who generally were male, who were generally very good at talking up some very big CVs with some very big experience with some very big names. And so these New Zealand companies were sort of brainwashed in thinking that was the pathway to success. First of all, it was the US. And second of all, it centered on hiring these really big guns in the US, paying them a shed load of money, more than what most founders and CEOs were being paid, to basically, be the beachhead and drive our kind of, let's go forward and blah, blah, blah. And lots of them didn't work out that well. Some of them did, don't get me wrong. There's some success stories, but A lot of them didn't. And I'll have to say, we were one of those failures at Unleashed. And it got to a point at one stage where I took $500,000 of cost out of the business and made more sales in the US after I did that. And it's kind of like, huh? But how does that work? Well, because we'd followed a kind of a blueprint that somebody had said, this is the pathway to success. So I realized that's not the pathway to success in offshore market. So then I stepped back from that and said, what is really important? One of the things I realized very quickly, and I don't think it doesn't seem so, blindingly monumental now, it seems quite obvious, is you cannot underestimate the importance of the culture of the business being present when you decide to go to a new market. You cannot do that thing, that value prop thing, talk about why we're good, why we have this thing, why you should buy us, with a whole bunch of people who don't even understand what your product is or what your business stands for or why you think you're better than everybody else. And you can't do that easily with people who just landed in your business 5 minutes ago, but they know the market really well. You can do that later. You can make those hires later, but they can't be your first hires, because your first hires in a new market have got to sell the vision and the dream and the passion, and they've got to get those early adopters and those people who go, whoa, and I believe in you. It's really hard to believe in someone who's saying, I just finished my induction and I've just done my product training and I know about this much about anything, but don't worry, wait, and I'll get the answers to those questions for you. And invariably, because it's a long way away, you can wait till tomorrow because I have to wait for somebody to come back to me. So we developed at Unleashed this approach called the on-market and then the in-market approach. And it's quite simple. I'd recommend it to all businesses who are thinking about this thing. Establish a team inside your business, ring fence them, put them in a special area over there maybe, put some walls up. I mean, do people still go into offices in New Zealand? They say that I'm talking in very kind of pragmatic, maybe not, but actually I'd say put them in an office. Don't have them working virtually. Get them together, have them working flexibly, but get them together from time to time. Put some partitions up, put the flag up of the place that you're talking about and make that your on-market focused team. And get them to act as if they're in the market, but they're not. They're on the market. Get them to subscribe to all the local news feeds. Get them to join all the groups virtually that they can. Get them to be, hooking up with all of the industry bodies and the segment influence. Get them to be pretty much immersed in that market, but they haven't gone anywhere, right? And run a pilot of how it is that you would develop a go-to-market strategy. And there's some good frameworks for how you do that, just from a corner of your current location in New Zealand or Australia, and get them to really understand the market deeply and the challenges, the constraints, the opportunities before you send anybody anywhere. Now, I'm saying that, get them to do a recce trip over to the market you're talking about as well, because boots on the ground, understanding, blah, blah, but then get them to come back. Don't leave them out there. Get them to come back. And then once you've proven out that sort of business case, or you've run a sort of a proof of concept or a pilot or whatever, and again, we did this with Unleashed, then send your people in market and make that team of people always include a really strong player from what I call the mothership, unabashedly the mothership, whether it's a mother or a father, still call it the mothership. And send someone from the mothership to the market to set up and make them somebody that's focused on those early rungs on the board, and then have a constant cycle and an internal strategy, a program of continually sending people into that market for short-term secondments. Most markets these days allow you to come in, even the US, which is, they can be yucky on this kind of stuff. You could still go in for, 3, 5, 8 weeks, UK, Europe, really easy, blah, blah, and go in and out and establish a program within your business of people coming in and out of that market, because not only do they go to the market and add value to the folk who are on the ground trying to build the business, but they bring that, it's logical, they bring that insight, those experiences, they bring it back to the mothership, and they say, hey, you guys were really critical about the fact that those folk out in, over there, we're talking about over there, and we were all sitting here going, what the heck, that's a real pain. Oh, no, I know what they're talking about now, because I've sat there in front of that and I know what that looks like. So that knowledge is really crucial. So do the on-market, then do the in-market, take someone from the mothership, and then hire only at a one-to-one basis of people you've got from the mothership and local hires. And do that until you get to an inflection point where you go, okay, now we're okay to bring back whoever we seeded there as probably quite a senior porter, because we've got enough people who are both experienced in the business and the local hires. Because if you think about the first person you hired locally to go with the person that you took from the mothership, probably by the time they've been there a year, if they've worked out and it's gone really well, except the fact that some of them will not work out as well and you'll have a high fail rate. But then by then, you can get to a point where you can pull back the original person. You've got this constant stream of people going, probably for the first couple of years, and you can hire locally at a rate now of experienced to inexperienced, but never more than 1-to-1. Make sure that ratio never goes that you've got more people who are from the local market but inexperienced from the company point of view. Don't let that get out of whack. And that's the sort of formula that we've worked to. And I've done it in a couple of businesses. And then the last thing I'd say, and I talk about this when you sit in New Zealand, and maybe it's not the same anymore, but everybody sort of said, you turn right, if you look at the map, right, depending on the map, but you turn right, you've got to be big in the US. You've got to make it in the US if you're going to make it. I'd say have a really hard think about that, because turning left is actually sometimes easier and just as, high value. And the UK and Europe, and this is something I've definitely learned in the last 2 years, is that New Zealanders are very scared of Europe, because I think one of the things we think is, the language thing. There's just, us down in New Zealand, we don't learn a lot of languages, right? We don't go to school and learn that we have to learn. I've got people in my team who speak 5 languages fluently, 5 languages, not because they're super smart, I mean they are, but just because if you're raised in a European context, that's the reality. You've got neighbours, you learn their language. But what I learned being in Europe is so much business is done in English, but you don't know that down in New Zealand. And I think Europe scares New Zealand businesses because we think it's really inaccessible, it's going to be really hard. But if you're in the UK and you focus on that, and the UK is an enormous market, it's got its own nuances, but it's enormous, and you think about Europe is a huge opportunity. It's not all about the US. Like the US is still big, it's important. Canada is really important as well, which by the way is nothing like the US. But don't just think you have to turn right when turning left is actually still quite viable.
That framework that you've just described, I've actually never heard anyone talk about that. I've heard questions of, okay, well, we've just raised, how many people should we hire? And there's this theory around, well, you should never just hire 1. You've got to have at least 2. But there's just been an immense amount of failure, immensely. I've just seen millions and millions and millions of dollars burned month after month, especially in the US market, on salespeople that just aren't getting it right. And no one's really quite sure. And they're just going through VC money like nothing, right? That framework, I can actually see that working. That's brilliant. So thank you for sharing that. I'm going to take.
We wasted.
I'm going to take that.
LMH. We wasted lots of money. So, yeah.
Yeah. People do.
Unleashed ex-shareholders are listening to this and going, really? Did I really tell them? I mean, maybe our old board's sitting there going, oh, okay, that was me. I said, yep, we have to go to the US and we have to hire these big guns. Yeah, but anyhow, it's learning, right? It's all learning.
Yes.
But I think I want to see them, what I want for New Zealand and the community is I want to see them maturing some of their thinking a little bit around different models and approaches to expanding well globally. And I'm not saying my approach is perfect, but I'm saying it's something I've used and I've used it more than once and it seems to work. So.
And that's the whole point of this, right? We're trying to help people go, try something new, learn off people who have done it, stop making the same mistakes. There's actually models that have been tried and tested and give it a go, and it may not work in their circumstance, but at least they can give it a go and experiment with it, right? LMH, this has been an epic conversation. I like every phase of our conversation. I just feel like I've learned so much about how you operate, and I can understand why you add so much value when you go into these scale-up companies. So thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. It's been a wonderful conversation. Thank you.
No problem at all. Thanks for the opportunity.
I'm Hussein Al-Bedri, producer of These 3 Things. This part of the podcast is called The 3 Learned Things. Shona and I wanted to briefly reflect on the 3 key insights we got from today's episode, which is brought to you in association with Callaghan Innovations Upskill Products. These products are designed to help startups uncover and acquire the skills they need to succeed.
Wow, That was a phenomenal interview. She's just a whirlwind of energy and passion, and I just really enjoyed that podcast. What did you take away from it?
I took away a lot of things. Lisa was amazing. The first thing that I found really inspiring was the way she talked about metrics and how they are things that everybody in the business needs to be across. The fact that, if you align your entire company around some of those metrics, she talks about the ARE metrics. If you align everybody in the company around those metrics, then you will get a much better result, not just from the way you run your company sort of way and the decisions that get made on the floor, but also when some of your people are in front of investors, it creates a much more compelling story that you have your entire organization rallying behind you on those metrics that you are presenting to your potential investors.
They were singing from the same song sheet, weren't they? They were all very clear on where their company was at, what their level of performance were, and what, there was no confusion, there's no ambiguity there. Yeah. For me, I sat on this for a little bit. What did I take away from LMH? And I love that acronym for her. And it was more just an overall sense of who she is and how she operates. She's a really high operator. She's working with big companies with big problems, and how, instead of being overwhelmed and looking at everything as an individual problem, you got this real sense that she groups things together. She tries to look for patterns and commonality or a project of work, and then she wraps a process around it. And she said to us, I think it was off camera actually, look, I have so many processes, and I'm not going to sit here today and say that I'm right and I can cookie cut these from place to place, because I'm always learning. In fact, I'm worried that when I stop working, if I just become a director on a board or just an investor, I'll lose touch with this ability to apply processes to different things. So she's not saying at all that she cookie cuts, but it was just more, here's a big problem. How do I approach this from a process sense? And I just thought, yeah, that's actually how she's operating and how we've probably all got to approach things to, the problems in our business.
Yeah, I mean, the richness of the formulas and the frameworks that she shared with us was fantastic. And her attitude, I think, is a big part of it. I've worked with Lisa before, and she's very tenacious, and she is a hard worker, and she loves to learn. And so that really came through in the evolution of her approach. The last one I probably want to touch on is her going offshore formula and framework. And I found that really inspiring, because we've heard from some of our other guests on the podcast some thoughts around how they test the market before they go to that offshore market. And she just had this formula of, the in-market approach versus on-market approach. And I just love that. I love the fact that, the idea of getting yourself immersed into the culture and the ways of doing things, and to the degree of dividing up an office and putting up a flag of a country, like that's such a brilliant way of doing things. And then when you land, having that formula to go one person from the mothership to one person new, and how you evolve and grow that team offshore being really, really important, so you don't lose the passion and the essence of what the company is all about.
Yeah, you do hear about that a lot. That used to be, you can't just hire one salesperson, you have to hire at least two. This used to be the mantra, okay, I've got to hire at least two salespeople. But really what they were picking up and what they probably couldn't articulate, where LMH has been able to, is like, you've got to have the why carry through over into this new city or country that you're going into. And the culture of your business, the passion, the drive, the commitment isn't going to translate unless you have a formula and process. And again, coming back to processes, right? She was just very clear. This is how I've done it, and I've done it several times, and I want to share it with you. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is gold. I've already told another founder about it already. They're going offshore to Australia. And I was like, you must listen to this podcast. It's going to be gold for you. And so, lots of learnings. It was fantastic.
So much wisdom. Really good.
Can you do me a favor? If you like this episode, can you hit the subscribe button? It really makes a huge difference to us. And it means that we can continue to evolve, grow, and bring more insights from a larger variety of guests. Thank you for listening to These Three Things. Our podcast is fueled by our passion and admiration for startups and the courageous people who create them. A huge thanks to our wonderful listeners and guests, my producer Hussein Al-Badri, our sound and visual crew, Elisa Grishkova and Carl Butler, and our sponsor, Callahan Innovation, who are just as committed and passionate about the ecosystem as we are. Tune in next week for another episode of These Three Things.